This is the Bataan nuclear power plant, which is currently the only nuclear reactor in the Philippines. But it never officially opened. Let's talk about its history and how looming talks on its reopening can further worsen the energy crisis in the Philippines. During the late 1930s and early 1940s, Enrico Fermi discovered that atoms can be split by neutrons. He successfully demonstrated this, creating the first man-made nuclear chain reaction under the stadium of the University of Chicago. This discovery led to the advancement of the Manhattan Project, with the primary goal of developing nuclear weapons. On July 16, 1945, in a desert location in New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was detonated. The Trinity test ushered the way to the atomic age. Before the World War II ended, the Japanese decided to fight until the bitter end, until the United States dropped several nuclear bombs, including the Little Boy and the Fat Man, on Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese Emperor announced the country's surrender. The combined death toll reached an estimate of 130 to 226,000. After the end of World War II, countries realized that the same technology that was used to end the war could be used to provide for the people, which led to the development of the first nuclear reactors. A nuclear reactor works by splitting an atom through a bombardment of neutron particles. When an atom is split, it releases more neutrons, which then hit other atoms, causing a chain reaction called nuclear fission. This reaction happens inside the fuel rods. The most commonly used fuel for a reactor is uranium due to its composition and its abundance in the Earth's crust. The chain reaction releases energy in the form of heat, which causes the temperature of the water that surrounds the core to increase. To prevent it from boiling, the water is pumped to the reactor at high pressure. These waters are radioactive as they directly circulate around the core and transfer heat through heat exchange pipes. These pipes hit a separate tank of non-radioactive water, producing steam that drives the turbine, generating electricity. In the year 1960s, the United States operated the first fully commercial, pressurized water reactor designed by Westinghouse. It was known as the Yankee Roe and had a capacity of 250 megawatts. It operated from 1960 to 1992. By the end of 1960, countries were ordering nuclear power plants with more than 1,000 megawatt of capacity. The Philippines was one of the countries that rode the tidal wave of nuclear power. In 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, led by Saudi Arabia, declared an oil embargo, causing an oil crisis and bumping the price of oil by 300%. To address the crisis, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. announced plans to build a nuclear power plant, as he believed that nuclear power could help ease the burden of rising energy demands and the country's reliance on oil. A committee was set up to secure funding for the power plant and review proposals submitted by General Electric and Westinghouse Electric. General Electric's proposal, which contained an extensive 200-page plan, was at an estimated cost of $700 million. The National Power Corporation, which was responsible for these dealings, was in deep connections and negotiations with General Electric at that time. But Westinghouse hired Herminio Di Sini, a close friend of Marcos, and managed to win the contract through direct connection. They presented their proposal to the president and the cabinet at a much more lower cost of $500 million for 2 reactors. But with no plans, the Filipino people would have to pay the price for this decision. In March of 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania, USA, had a partial meltdown. A few days later, some radioactive gas was released, but not enough to cause harm to the environment. But even with minimal physical effects, these events still caused countries to re-examine their respective nuclear energy programs. Through the Letter of Instruction number 957, series of 1979 signed by Marcos, the Bataan nuclear power plant was said to be unsafe and a potential hazard to the health and safety of the public. It also says that the contractor, Westinghouse, should introduce fundamental changes in design and adapt safeguards to ensure the safety and protect the health of the public. The construction was halted until 10 months later. Through the Letter of Instruction number 1065, Marcos decided to resume the construction of the power plant. 9 years later, in 1965, the power plant has reached its completion. But its final cost had skyrocketed to $2.3 billion, which is 4 times more and half the capacity of the original proposal of Westinghouse. In addition to this, growing violence and corruption in the Marcos regime led millions of Filipinos to march along EDSA, and on February 26, 1986, Marcos and his family fled to Hawaii, marking the end of his 20-year dictatorship. The EDSA People Power Revolution is a victory for the people's freedom and democracy. But the damages left by the Marcoses will be passed along to the next administration, including the opening of the Bataan nuclear power plant. 2 months later, in April of 1986, a major disaster will seal the fate of the Bataan nuclear power plant. The Chernobyl reactor in Ukraine, through a series of mistakes and error, caused the reactor to melt down and release 5% of the radioactive core into the environment. This dealt a massive blow to the nuclear power generation throughout the world. The newly elected President Corazon Aquino decided to mothball the BNPP and let the next administration to decide on what to do with it. From then on, there was silence in the Philippine nuclear energy program. In 2007, 32 years after it was completed, the Filipino people finally paid the loan that was responsible for the construction of the BNPP. A total of 64.7 billion pesos was paid, but the government continues to pay 40 to 50 million pesos a year for its maintenance. The corruption that happened during its construction was also revealed by Sandigan Bayan, the country's special court that handles graft and corruption involving government employees. The court orders Herminio Di Sini, a Marcos crony, to repay the government $50 million for receiving commissions in the Westinghouse deal. The Supreme Court of the Philippines also reaffirmed this decision in 2021. But now, the silence is being broken. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte signed an Executive Order number 164, stating that the country shall ensure the peaceful use of nuclear technology anchored on critical tenets of public safety, national security, energy self-sufficiency, and environmental sustainability. This was done 3 months before the May 2022 presidential elections, in which the frontrunner was the son of the man who started it all. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., or Bongbong Marcos, won the elections. It seems that the talks on the revival of the almost 4-decade-old power plant are now being brought back. Certain individuals such as Congressman Marco Wangco and the DOST-PNIR head Carlo Arcilla have been pushing for its revival. The Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, has been actively promoting the use of nuclear energy in the Philippines, highlighting the benefits and how it can meet the country's energy demands. However, there is conflicting debate on whether the power plant is safe from natural disasters. Alfredo Mahar Lagmay, a Filipino geologist and professor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and the current executive director of Project NOAA, led the only detailed study of the southwestern portion of Mount Natib, a volcano that is located 10 kilometers away from the plant. His team was the first to map the area and highlight that the Lubao Fault, which passes through the Natib volcano, comes right out of the power plant. But the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology certified that there is no fault underneath the power plant. But aside from all these, the main question that is not properly discussed is the cost. The Korean Electric Power Corporation conducted a feasibility study and suggested that the BNPP could be rehabilitated in 4 to 5 years at an estimated cost of $1 billion. In 2021, the total capacity of the Philippines is at 26,882 megawatts. 70% come from fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gases, and only 30% of the country's capacity comes from renewable resources. If the Bataan nuclear power plant is reopened, it will only contribute around 2.3% of the current country's capacity. Throughout history, the construction of a nuclear power plant often go over budget. The Philippine debt as of November of 2022 swells to 13.5 trillion pesos. It is likely that if the revival of the Bataan nuclear power plant pushes through, the Philippines would have to borrow again to provide for its rehabilitation costs. Training a new set of personnel is also an additional matter that needs to be discussed, as old operators will need to learn new guidelines and technologies to reduce the risk of human error in running the power plant. If the Bataan nuclear power plant were to be revived, regardless of all these reasons, the cost of electricity would remain the same or possibly skyrocket, as the people would have to pay for its construction. The Filipino taxpayers would have to wait 4 to 5 years for it to ever produce a single watt of electricity. But it will take more than a decade after its reopening to reap its benefits if the government takes the same route as it did before. Instead of focusing on nuclear energy, reducing the use of fossil fuels and increasing the use of renewables should be the top priority. Nuclear energy is a baseload system, meaning it can operate continuously. However, there are other sources, such as geothermal energy, that are both renewable and reliable. Renewable resources carry less risks and a much more lower cost. According to a Lazard report, the levelized cost of electricity, which is the average cost per unit of electricity produced over the lifetime of various energy sources, indicates that solar costs around $36 to $44 per megawatt hour, while nuclear costs $112 to $189 per megawatt hour. Nuclear power has the potential to significantly boost the use of renewables. But reopening the Bataan nuclear power plant may not be the cost-effective nor the answer to the increasing prices of electricity in the Philippines. Diversifying the energy grid with renewables is the best choice for the country, as nuclear energy's massive risks are not worth it if there are other alternatives that can ensure the country's energy security today and in the coming generations.